Good evening to all our participants back home in Ireland and abroad on the mainland Europe. My name is Gareth Diamond. I am the current president of Ireland Network Chicago. Obviously, the last 12 months have been extremely difficult to continue our in-person networking. So to that end, ourselves at Ireland Network Chicago have done a great job pivoting to offer online and virtual webinars, seminars, and networking opportunities. So this is the third in our webinar series. And today we are very happy to introduce a great panel of experts to discuss Made in Brexit, at which over the next hour or so, we are going to discuss the economic and social cultural impacts that the Brexit situation has had on EU, UK, and United States relations. So I'm very happy to introduce our moderator for this event, Méabh McMahon. Méabh is a TV news reporter and anchor for the international news channel Euronews and presents a weekly lifestyle program on Belgian TV, Bruce. Originally from Navan in County Meath, she has over 10 years experience of live TV, news gathering in a range of European languages, as well as hosting conferences and other live events. So thank you for helping moderate this event today, Méabh, and without further delay, I'll hand the panel over to yourself.
Thank you so much, Gareth, and thank you for that beautiful introduction about myself that I wasn't expecting. Another piece of information, I was in fact Tony Connelly, one of our panelists, little intern for a couple of days when I moved to Brussels about over 10 years ago. So I do thank him dearly for that. I was very enthusiastic back then. I think I've become a little bit more skeptical as the years go by, but yeah, I've been based here as a journalist for over 10 years now, and yeah, getting a lot to get my teeth into. So good afternoon to you all in the States tuning in. I hope you can tuck into your lunch as you join us. And of course, good evening to all those here in Europe. And I'm delighted to be here for this event, this virtual gathering made in Brussels, all about the practical implications of Brexit, just 3 months since Brexit really became a reality. And as Gareth said there, we do have a stellar panel for you. He wasn't making that up. We were meant to have a female panelist because that's one topic I'm quite passionate about, is having women as well on panels, but she couldn't make it, but she was kindly replaced by her colleague. So thank you very much for that. So let me now introduce our panelists. So joining us from County Meath in Ireland, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Bruton, known to us all, of course, as the former Taoiseach of Ireland, a position that he held from 1994 until 1997. He's also the former EU ambassador to the US, a position that he held from 2004 until 2009. And John Bruton, as you probably know, was deeply involved in the Northern Irish peace process that led, of course, to the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. He understands more than anyone the complexities of Brexit and knows, of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol like the back of his hand. So welcome, John Bruton, and thank you so much for being with us. And joining us from Belfast, I'd like to welcome Steve Harper. He is the Executive Director of International Business at Invest Northern Ireland. Steve Harper is in charge of the Trade Division and the International Investment Division. So he's been getting ready for Brexit for the last couple of years and believes that actually, thanks to Brexit, Northern Ireland is now on the world map. So welcome, Steve Harper, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Méabh.
And joining us from Dublin, I'd like to welcome Simon McKeever. He is, of course, the CEO of the Irish Exporters Association, a position he's held since 2013. Now, like Steve Harper, Simon has been getting ready and preparing for the reality of Brexit for the last couple of years, getting Irish businesses, both small and big, ready for the changes that would come about when the UK decided to go for that hard Brexit path. So welcome, Simon McKeever. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Méabh, and good afternoon, everybody.
And then, of course, last but not least, joining us from just down the road here in the EU quarter of Brussels, I'd like to welcome Tony Connelly, RTE Europe editor, the host of the Brexit Public podcast, and the author as well of this book, all about Brexit and Ireland. A pretty interesting read if you want to find out lots of really, really interesting facts. For example, that when you go and have a Chinese in Chinatown in London, your duck is actually coming from Ireland. And other facts that IBEC had already posted and printed posters thanking the UK for staying in the EU. And when they found out about the result of the referendum, of course, they had to like pretty much put that project on hold. And in doing so, probably lost a lot of money. So thanks, Tony, for your book and for your reporting over the last couple of years on Brexit. Tony Connelly here in the EU bubble has really become a bit of a source, not just for breaking news, but also for hard analysis and lots of really nitty gritty details on everything to do with Brexit, the realities of Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol, all those little tiny issues related to the trade and the issues and the problems that we're obviously going to talk about over the next hour or so. So thanks, Tony.
Thanks very much, Méabh. Thanks very much.
Another-
Pleasure to be here, and good afternoon, everyone in the States.
And it's a pretty busy Brexit-related news day here in Brussels, and we'll be asking Tony a couple of questions in just a minute. But just to give you a bit of an idea, so the idea of this panel first is for all our panelists just to really set the scene and contextualise how Brexit has impacted them and their daily life and their work over the last couple of years, and then bring you to speed, as I said, with the latest news developments here in Brussels. We're waiting for a dinner to take place over the next couple of minutes, in fact, between Maros Sefcovic and David Frost, the British Brexit negotiator, or minister rather. And also we had some votes over in the European Parliament with the Trade Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee on that actual trade deal itself. So Tony Connelly will bring us up to speed on all that in a couple of minutes. And then we can dive into the bigger questions, the bigger philosophical, if you like, questions on global trade, global diplomacy, the new administration, of course, in the US. It's just over 100 days since Joe Biden, of course, has taken up that position. So yeah, I think we've got a lot to talk about, and we have a great panelist. And this is not just about you sitting there, which is so lovely, by the way, to see some of your faces. And this is very much about you participating as well. So feel free to pop in your remarks, your comments, your questions in the chat, just right here on the Zoom webinar, and we will address them. I'll put them to our panelists as we go along. But first, John Bruton, if you would like to do the honours and kick off this discussion and really give us your assessment on where we are and shed some light really on those recent riots and the social unrest that we've seen in Northern Ireland, which is of course not just down to Brexit. I mean, the issues are so much more complex than that. But how concerned are you? And just really tell us, where are we now?
It's actually difficult to distinguish the effects of Brexit and from the effects of COVID. Both are extremely disruptive events, are having a negative effect on the economy of Europe, but which is causing the more disruption is a question that we'll have to leave to historians. I think Brexit is a rupture, it's a divorce between Britain and the rest of the continent of Europe, including Ireland. The long-term effects of this are hard to determine. It will depend on future governments in Britain. But clearly, strategically, this detachment of Britain from Europe is going to have effects in the area of international security as well, because we're no longer going to see British and European ministers meeting casually on an almost weekly basis. Britain is going to be moving in a different sphere, and that's going to have some effect. As far as Ireland is concerned, obviously the controversy about the Ireland Protocol is acute in Northern Ireland at the moment. And this stems, I think, from two causes. One cause is obviously the disruption of importation from Britain to Northern Ireland as a result of Northern Ireland having to meet EU checks before it can import from Britain. And that has had a particular effect in the area of things like garden centres, certain foods and so forth are not coming in as readily or as easily available in Northern Ireland as they are otherwise. The other is a political effect, and that political effect is by virtue of the fact that in future, laws in regard to the standards to be met by goods on sale in Northern Ireland are going to be made not in London, not in Belfast, but in Brussels by the European Union. And that is causing some anxiety, shall we say, certainly among the unionist community in Northern Ireland, because they feel that laws are being made for them in which they have no democratic input. And that's something, that's a genuine problem that I think we are going to need to resolve going forward. And hopefully the meetings that are taking place this evening between Sefcovic and Lord Frost will solve or move towards solving some of the immediate practical difficulties. I think it will require bigger political engagement to solve the longer term divergences and democratic difficulties that are arising in regard to both Brexit and the Ireland Protocol.
Okay. Thank you so much, John, for those introductory remarks. That leads me on nicely to Tony Connelly. Tony, John Bruton mentioned those talks that are taking place tonight here in Brussels. There's a feeling of cautious optimism, perhaps, that they might be able to solve the issues, but I guess they're too complex. Or do we expect to see some sort of a document in the next couple of weeks? Can you just talk us through what you expect for tonight and just contextualize this whole issue for our viewers?
Yes, I can indeed, Maeve. Excuse me. I recall that on Christmas Eve, when the trade agreement was negotiated, I had been covering Brexit for 4 years intensely, and this was the final piece in the jigsaw, a free trade agreement between the UK and the EU. And I really felt that I was kind of getting my life back, and that I'd go on to report on other things. But of course, as you all know, Brexit hasn't gone away. It's just a different kind of Brexit. It's now the kind of the real deal. And we're seeing that not just in the UK, but more acutely, as John has said, in Northern Ireland with the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And that has kind of fed into a really difficult relationship between the EU and UK since the 1st of January. I don't know if people knew exactly what to expect in terms of the chemistry between both sides once the trade agreement was concluded. But things got off to a bad start. There was a row over the status of the EU's embassy in London. There were problems facing Scottish shellfish producers, who a lot of whom appeared to be heading out of business. And there was a fairly cantankerous set of barbs being exchanged between both sides. And then, of course, you had the episode at the end of January when the European Commission moved to invoke, or gave itself the power to invoke, Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which of course upset the apple cart immensely and sent the whole protocol situation into a kind of a tailspin. And we've really been trying to recover from that so far. But I think the important thing to remember is that no matter how fractious the politics of this and how difficult the relationships are and how much history gets tangled into this process, especially with Northern Ireland, it is ultimately a technical process as well as a political one. And at each turn, when it looks like the protocol is going to fall apart, or the relationship between Britain and the EU and with Ireland somewhere in between, it seems to get back on track because of the nature of the protocol. And it's about really boring things like SPS, food safety checks. It's about VAT, it's about customs. And ultimately, the European Union and the UK have an international treaty that they've both signed. So they have invested a lot in this. And no matter how much the UK government appears to take the unionist side on the protocol, saying it damages unionist identity, it drives a wedge between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK still did sign up to this, and they haven't really got an alternative. So what they've been trying to do is to get the protocol made more flexible, to be adapted, to be made more pragmatic, to whittle down the kinds of checks and controls that are being applied, to make the protocol have as little impact as possible on the livelihoods and lives of people in Northern Ireland. and they haven't really, in all sincerity, tried to get rid of the protocol altogether. So the protocol is really here to stay. The question is, to what extent can the UK government implement what is required of it in a way that will not alienate unionists? And to what extent can the European Union be flexible in how the protocol is implemented? And that's really what tonight's dinner is about. We've had various agreements between both sides, including a very important agreement in December, which set out clearly how the Northern Ireland Protocol would be implemented. There would be a set of grace periods, meaning the most onerous checks and controls would be delayed for 3 months or 6 months. There would be a trusted trader scheme. Various other facilitations would be brought to bear on the situation. But ultimately, both sides felt that that was going to make the protocol work over time. And from the EU's point of view, the idea was that Northern Ireland would adapt to this new situation politically and economically and socially. Of course, that hasn't happened. The Article 16 affair really lost a lot of the moral high ground that the European Union had on its handling of Northern Ireland. And again, the UK is asking the EU for more concessions, for longer grace periods, for more facilitations. Now, I think ultimately the EU is prepared to be flexible because it's not really in the EU's interests either for Northern Ireland to be an ongoing source of conflict on the periphery of the European Union. Given how much the EU has invested in Northern Ireland over the years, financially and politically, but more importantly, given how much the EU invested in the Irish question in the Brexit negotiations, the Irish government completely outsourced its Brexit policy to the European Commission, and the European Commission took the Irish view that Brexit was damaging to the Irish peace process and the all-island economy and the North-South relationships, and ultimately the Good Friday Agreement. So it's in the EU's interest for that process to have a happy ending, if you like. But at the same time, member states want to make sure that the the single market is protected. They don't want a kind of a grey zone in Northern Ireland where British goods, which are third country goods, can leak into the single market, especially when it comes to food, because Britain doesn't have a great track record when it comes to food scandals. So I think ultimately this is a technical and political process, but to me, it can only go forward. No matter how distressing the rioting was in Belfast and Derry and other places, I don't really see the UK government completely abandoning the protocol. You know, they are actually investing a lot of money to make the protocol work, millions of pounds. They're building infrastructure at Northern Ireland ports. As a senior Northern Ireland official said to me this week, those actions could be mistaken for sincerity on the UK part. And what they're doing at the moment is both sets of officials, British and European, are having technical talks. But tonight's dinner is to give those technical talks some political momentum. And I think we should be able to see some agreement emerge in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So that's really what I can say at the moment. That the two men are meeting for dinner, Mara Shevchevich and David Frost. We're expecting a statement later. If I get the statement, obviously, within the duration of the webinar, I'll happily share any comments that I can. But that's really the best way I could describe things at the moment.
Tony, if there is a statement, there'll hardly be anything really practical on that statement tonight, anything really about the solution.
No, I don't think there'll be any big breakthrough. I think they will keep this low key. It's an informal dinner. It's not the full meeting of the Joint Committee, which is the body set up to implement the protocol, that bringing both sides together. So I think we'll get a low-key statement committing both sides to continuing technical discussions and to try to make the protocol work. But I think it's probably worth pointing out as well that the losers here are the DUP, because they're kind of banking on the protocol being abandoned, and they're banking on the protocol facing mounting opposition in Northern Ireland, because of course there will be a vote on the protocol in 3 years' time in Stormont in the Assembly, and also there are Assembly elections next year. So while the DUP won't be able to get rid of the protocol, they can try and use their opposition to it for maximum political leverage electorally in Northern Ireland.
And just briefly, Tony, what flexibility do you think the Commission can show to try and find an arrangement?
Well, my understanding is that the Commission were on the verge of granting the UK an extension to the grace periods that were agreed. I mean, the key grace period is to do with supermarkets. There are thousands of tons of food products that leave the UK every day to fill supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland. When Britain was before all of this happened, before Brexit, that was simply a seamless, frictionless process. But now, because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, Northern Ireland is subject to EU food safety rules. And on paper, any products of animal origin, so that's meat or anything with dairy or eggs, all of those need what's called an export health certificate, which needs to be signed off by a vet. And you can imagine that one lorry load of produce going to a supermarket in Northern Ireland might have thousands of product lines on there. Do all of them need a document signed by a vet? This is where the protocol really bites in Northern Ireland, and the UK and Northern Ireland businesses and supermarkets are trying to say, look, there's got to be some better way of doing this. Now, both sides agreed last December that they would get 3 months to adapt to the situation. But of course, the UK said it's not enough time, and then the UK unilaterally decided to extend the grace period, and for that, the EU took legal action against the UK. But I think the EU will be flexible on that issue. They will extend grace periods, and they are looking at ways to make that a smoother operation. One issue that could make things a lot easier, which we can get into later in the discussion, is the idea of a veterinary agreement between the EU and the UK. If the UK decided to align with EU food safety rules in the same way that Switzerland does and Norway does, then perhaps 90% of these checks would disappear. Now, the UK so far has refused to do that because they don't want to be hamstrung in terms of its trading aspirations around the rest of the world, and in particular, a potential trade agreement with the United States. If the EU has to comply with, if the UK has to comply with EU food safety standards, then that might hamper a US free trade agreement. But of course, such an agreement is not really on the horizon at the moment. So there could be a lot to be gained by the UK agreeing to set aside its kind of sovereignty obsessions and agree to some kind of alignment with EU food safety rules. That would actually solve a lot of the problems facing the protocol.
Could solve problems, but it wouldn't be, of course, in line with the idea of making Britain the greatest country in the world and the whole plan for global Britain and all that. So, yeah. Okay, Tony, thank you so much for that. And it moves me nicely now over to Simon McKeever, who has been behind the Irish government's campaign of getting businesses, small and big, ready, the whole Brexit Are You Ready campaign. So Simon, just tell us how you've been adapting, how you've been going about this and the kind of trajectory over the last couple of years.
Sure, Meg, and good afternoon, everybody. I suppose, we've been on this, Tony's talked about reporting this for the last 4 years. We've been on a roadshow for this since before the vote. So since back in 2015, when we knew the vote was coming, and really our role as an organisation, in many ways, we're kind of the Irish Manufacturing Exporters Association, and we really get down into the nitty gritty all those certs and customs procedures and how you get stuff and put it in the box and get it on and off the island. So really our sweet spot is in your kind of with your supply chain and logistics managers. And like we have the whole export industry, it really is what we cover. And so really, I think our role, as we saw it way back then, was to, in some ways, almost frighten the companies a bit. We had to kind of spell out to them how serious this was going to be, and really we embarked upon a series of what was then seminars rather than webinars, where we had different politicians from Ireland, from the government at the time, the British ambassador at the time, and different experts, just very gently from 2015 onwards, warming up the concept that a massive shock to the system was coming. And even though you look at the kind of trade figures between Britain and Ireland, and it's 9 or 10% of Ireland's export market at the moment, it's still a huge number. And one of the biggest implications of it is that there has been extremely integrated supply chains between Britain and Ireland, particularly in the agri-food sector. And they're very difficult to disentangle. And so we knew there was going to be a massive shock to the system coming, as in fairness did the Irish government. And really, the government has engaged with Irish business since back in 2015 in the run-up to the vote. We have been engaged with our members, spelling out the risks, and then actually we created a lot of training courses around the customs prep that people need to do, and that ranged from very complex thing like authorized economic operator, which was called CTPAT in the US, right down to actually teaching our members what to put in the boxes on the customs forms. And we have been extremely involved in the government's training program for the last 2 years in getting Irish businesses ready for Brexit. And so really, for the last 3 years, there has been a massive concerted effort across government and across organizations like ourselves and IBEC and others, to try and get the message out to companies to get ready. Then those of us who look at different parts of where supply chain is really what we look at in transport, really to try and get our companies and our members up to speed on what they need to do. And even having had a 3-year journey on preparing companies for it, it was the shock to the system on the 1st of January was still enormous. And the initial shocks that we saw to the system was in some ways just people getting used to the complexity of the new systems. There is a complete shortage of customs agents both in Britain and Ireland. And behind the supply chain of goods, the physical movement of goods, sits a supply chain of information, whether it's health certs or whether it's the customs information. And it became very clear in the first few days of 2021 that a lot of the problem was residing in the UK, because the information that needed to get into the Irish customs system from an import side into Ireland has to come out of the UK exporter in the first place. And, they just haven't a clue over there in terms of what's required for them. And, I've outlined a 5-year and a particularly ramped up 3-year period of prep that Irish companies and business and government has engaged in in Ireland to get companies ready. We were still we brought out a brand new course this year in the first couple of weeks of January, which, as I said to you, was literally, we'll hold your hand and we'll show you what goes in the box of each of those customs declarations. And really, I don't know about other people on this side of the water, but I only saw the first kind of public information campaign ads on Sky News and Sky Television in the kind of month of September, October last year. That's when I saw the kind of British government beginning to think about it. But if you're, I think you were alluding to global Britain a few minutes ago, Maeve. and that everything will be fantastic. But I think if your government has an attitude that everything is going to be fine come the 31st of December 2020, and if a lot of business and business organizations in the UK were quiet about speaking up, then we find ourselves in a position where the UK is totally and utterly unprepared for dealing with the complexities of Brexit. And so, we had come January, that the next big issue that Irish businesses were trying to get ready were the imposition of import controls around animal-derived products on the 1st of April, which, Tony was mentioning that the British government has taken a few unilateral decisions. They took a unilateral decision to roll that out for 6 months. That's great for Irish businesses, actually, because it really helps. But it's very clear to us, come 6 months, they won't be ready then either. And so, there is this sense that, there was mention of the export of duck to the Chinese restaurants in the UK. I know the company that does all those exports, and the amount of our members who have had to sit down with their counterparts in the UK and show them what to do to be able to trade on and off the island of Great Britain is just enormous. So I think the UK has not been ready. The message from on the top has been, that the global trading Britain and that everything will be fine. And really, we only see the kind of really senior politicians in the UK responding in the last few weeks before Christmas. And they're, I think what we're going through at the moment is an extension under many different words. So Irish businesses have adapted very well, since the start. So we had the hiccups with our own customs systems, with the lack of information coming out of the UK. And John mentioned about, which has caused the bigger problem for Irish business at the moment. Is it COVID-19 or is it Brexit? In the first 6 weeks of this year, it was definitely Brexit. But since then, it's been COVID-19, and a lot of Irish companies are trying to get their head around what is an impending global supply squeeze. There's a supply squeeze coming onto global manufacturing around the world. Because of the uptick in China being first out of the blocks in its manufacturing, and now massive demand coming out of the United States from the consumer market as that comes out of the COVID period first. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm sure there'll be some questions coming through. But it's been an exceptionally busy time for us. We have been looking to see if we can help the British side of things with some of our training courses, because they could be adapted very easily to both the north and the other side of the water as well. But I think we need to be under no illusion that in as much as we have been reasonably well prepared for this, and I'll leave you with this last statistic. There was about 12,500 Irish companies registered for what's called an EORI number, which you need to be able to trade before Christmas, and 9,500 have registered in the first 2 months of this year. So it does show that even though we spent 3 years intensively preparing for Brexit, there was still a lot of Irish companies, particularly very small ones, that were not ready. And I won't mention that. I won't go into detail now, but one of the big things, of course, that has happened is that particularly large Irish companies are now completely avoiding the UK, the land bridge, as it's called. And they've made a decision way back in the second half of last year that they were not going to travel through the UK anymore because of the customs problems. And we've seen a huge increase in the amount of shipping directly into France and into Northern Europe. So the UK is being bypassed from a transport point of view, and we are beginning to see the emergence of the UK being dropped from Irish supply chains as well. So, and that we're seeing trucks coming in these boats from Rosslare, from parts of Europe that have never ever been in Ireland before. So, the global trading Britain, just look at their trade figures and you'll see the myth that is. It's a total myth.
Yeah, in fact, I think, Tony, you reported on this as well. We reported on this for Euronews a couple of weeks ago. We visited a shop, a Stone Manor shop here in Brussels, where now I can go to get my Barry's tea from SuperValue, the Irish chain, or my Irish sausages coming in from Roscommon. I spoke to Ross, the store manager there, and he said that, like, you know, the deal was done Christmas Eve. Came January, the shelves were empty, and the British Chamber of Commerce were providing webinars, but he said it was too little and it was too late. So he's got his supplies coming in directly from Ireland. He said sometimes there's hiccups due to the weather, but apart from that, he said things are going smoothly. So it'll be interesting to see in the future how
It's happening all over the Costas, by the way, where, you know, you would have British and Irish people who are retired, and the sausages or tea or whatever you want to call it that they were sourcing from Britain, they're now sourcing from Ireland because we have similar tastes. So, you know, the UK is beginning to be bypassed a bit from a supply chain point of view.
And this is a reason, of course, for Ireland to celebrate a little bit after many years of mourning Brexit. This is, you know, Ireland can reap the benefits of this. And I know Board Bia, of course, was pleased with these opportunities. Simon, thank you so much for that very frank take. In fact, a lot of what you said there was put together in a CNN article I was reading yesterday, which CNN Business, which says 100 days later, Brexit is not working and businesses want it fixed. And they spoke to as well the British Chamber of Commerce, saying the difficulties are not just teething problems, they go much deeper than that. When Boris Johnson announced his Brexit trade deal, he said that the UK companies would be doing even more business with the EU, and that is just not the case. So cry for help there. Steve Harper, you've been waiting patiently to have your turn, so now it is your turn. Tell us how you've been getting ready and how Invest Northern Ireland's been getting ready. You know, you're in a pretty unique position now. Of course, you're still in the single market, but you can still access the UK market. So tell us how things have been for you over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
what your kind of prognosis is.
Yes, thanks, Méabh. Thanks, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's interesting, Simon, talking about you know, those opportunities that have gone for UK manufacturers in the Costas, and some of those are being picked up by Northern Irish companies because obviously they are now able to continue to sell into the EU. So where there are certain issues for UK companies, I think companies in Northern Ireland will see that. A small anecdote before I start is the US company Aflac, who recently set up in Belfast about a year and a half ago, and have leased a very swanky office down on the waterfront here in the middle of Belfast. And they had a virtual opening of their office probably about 2-3 months ago, and obviously everyone's out of it again. But what they have on their wall, they have written resilient, reinventive, and adaptable, because that's what they found the experience of their workforce, which they hired during the whole COVID pandemic. They found those words to be very apt. But those words are really apt to Northern Irish business, in my view. We have had, you know, a very troubled past, as you know, in Northern Ireland. But business has tried to trade on and has found opportunities throughout all of that, and that will continue to be the case. And whilst, you know, we've heard a lot of the difficulties of Brexit, and I don't disagree with any of those. We are seeing certainly supply chains in GB coming into Northern Ireland not prepared at all, and actually it's too difficult to do. So we're not going to do that. So we're starting to see those difficulties, but at the same time we are seeing opportunities, and the businesses in Northern Ireland are seeing the opportunities to possibly replace EU suppliers in the supply chains, and likewise then Northern Irish businesses trying to replace UK suppliers in the European supply chain. So there has been a lot of disruption, but certainly there are opportunities there. I guess from 2016, when the referendum happened, if we're honest, in Invest Northern Ireland, we have two real rules really. Not one is to attract inward investment into Northern Ireland, and the second is like Simon has, is to encourage our indigenous companies to export around the world. We were very, very worried, obviously at the time of the Brexit referendum, how that's going to affect both of those things. But in reality, from 2016 to 2021, in 5 years, we had 99 brand new investors come into Northern Ireland, and it was a surprise for us. Why is that the case? I guess well, people investors were coming to Northern Ireland for talent, and they're coming for access to talent. They never came for market access to the EU. We are one of the world's leading destinations for US cybersecurity investment companies. That was never about access to the UK market or to the EU market. And so when the Brexit referendum happened, automatically Northern Ireland, because sterling devalued, became 20% even cheaper than we were previously. So that was a really good, I guess, period of time for us. We got a lot of US investment coming into Northern Ireland. For those of you who have been to Northern Ireland recently and Belfast, will have seen it's a place changed, certainly in the last 10 years, massively so, and driven by a lot of that inward investor. And those jobs are very well paid jobs. They are starting to attract people coming back to Northern Ireland, which we'd love to see more of, because so many of our young people have been educated either in the UK or Republic of Ireland and stay there and don't come back. And so it's been really good to bring back. So I guess the point I'm trying to get across is that, yes, there are serious difficulties for supply chains in Northern Ireland, but businesses are adaptable, and businesses, just like they are in the Republic of Ireland, are finding new supply chains. They are finding ways to replace others in their supply chains and get new business. And my belief is that they'll find a way through this.
And Steve, are you satisfied with the representation that you will have here in Brussels going forward?
Yeah, well, that's I think certainly the business lobby groups have had a very good representation and have built up some very close representations in Brussels, and they have had some of those good conversations. Obviously, it's a difficulty, as the very first point that was made, I think, by Tony or John, about we are, for goods, we are subject to EU regulations, and not having a seat at that table does, I think, pose some difficulties, and so it'll be really interesting to see what compromise can come out of that. So yeah, there will be difficulties, no doubt, mate.
Yeah. Okay, Steve Harper, thank you so much for that. So interesting. You're making me want to jump on a plane right now and go to Belfast, a city that I love to visit. And of course, we're all at this stage, I think, dying to get on a plane and travel somewhere, but we'll definitely go whenever we can. Thank you so much to my panelists so far. At this stage, if there are any questions from the audience, please do just pop them there in the chat. James is keeping an eye on them, and we'll feed them in. And in the meantime, I will just keep the conversation going and asking a couple of questions to our panelists. John Bruton and Tony Connelly, you mentioned about the difficult relationship now between Dublin and London. And just this morning, there was another Brexit panel, in fact, organised by the European Movement in Ireland, alongside, in fact, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Germany and the UK as well. So they had a couple of different panelists, among them the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, and he spoke a lot about this fact, and it's something that we've heard for years, that with Brexit, Ireland was losing its best friend around the table at EU summits, a country that it had so much in common with, a country that stood up for it. And now that that's gone, and Leo Varadkar said this morning, he said, there's a huge gap now. And he said, this gap is not just because of the pandemic, because we can't travel. He said, there's a real gap because we just can't see the ministers now in Brussels or Luxembourg or at the fringes of meetings, albeit virtual meetings. And he said, this is a big issue. And he's hoping that there'll be some sort of something set up and there'll be engagement from the UK government. So John Bruton, I'd like to hear what you think about this relationship going forward. What kind of solutions can be put on the table? Should we start seeing regular summits between Dublin and London, ministerials? What can you see happening?
Well, Britain is not going to be going back into the European Union in the foreseeable future. So I think the first thing we in Ireland have got to do is to adapt to the fact that Britain is not there, and that we're going to have to build a better understanding with France, with Germany, with Luxembourg, with Poland, with all the countries of the European Union, countries which we know perhaps to go on holiday in, but whose languages we don't speak, whose newspapers we don't read, whose television stations we don't watch. Whereas we do watch British television and British newspapers, the content of which is going to be, to a greater extent, irrelevant to Ireland, whereas the content of the French and German newspapers is going to be comparatively much more relevant to Ireland in future, because those are the people we're going to have to be making decisions with about our future. So I think this is going to have long-term implications for us in Ireland. I think we're going to have to spend a lot more time learning German, learning French, making sure that Irish people join the European Union institutions. When we joined the European Union first, a lot of Irish people in the 70s went into the European Commission and the other bodies, and they have been very helpful to us over their careers, but most of those people have now retired, and they haven't been replaced by quite that number of young new people going into the EU institutions. I think we're going to need to do that. Now, as far as our relationship with Britain is concerned, I think it is a big loss that Irish ministers and Irish civil servants are not going to be bumping into British civil servants in the corridors, where things that are not yet sufficiently a big problem that you'd raise them at a formal meeting can be sort of mentioned to one another, and issues that can be diffused in that way. That opportunity is going to cease, has ceased now, because we're not meeting the British officials anymore in that way. So as your question implies, we're going to have to do something else. And we have in the Good Friday Agreement or Belfast Agreement a three-cornered or a three-dimension structure. There's an internal arrangement in Northern Ireland where there is to be power sharing. There's supposed to be north-south institutions operating to do more things together on an all-island basis. And that's working fairly well in some areas, but in other areas it's not working very much at all. And then there is a third strand, which was the so-called East-West strand, where there was supposed to be meetings in what's known as the British-Irish Intergovernmental Council between senior Irish ministers and senior British ministers to discuss all sorts of issues that would affect the two islands on the north-west corner of Europe. Now, that body is virtually not functioning at all. It isn't functioning largely because I think the British didn't want to be meeting with Dublin government too often in case that might upset the Unionists. A completely misplaced fear, in my view. Well, if the Unionists were upset about it, they shouldn't be, because we are two islands together. And the more Ireland and the Irish politicians understand what's going on in London and what's going on in Belfast, the better our lives can be together, and the more the sort of opportunities that Steve mentioned can be exploited if we are working along on the same wavelength, so to speak, because we're meeting regularly in a British-Irish context, because we're no longer meeting regularly in an EU context because Britain has left. I think the long-term effect of Brexit is going to be that Ireland will move not physically closer to France, but psychologically closer to France. It's going to be our nearest European neighbour, really. And that psychologically goes back to situations that maybe obtained in the 17th century when Ireland and the continent were very close together for political reasons. We're now going to be close together in the 21st century for political reasons in a way that we weren't in the intervening period. And that's, I think, going to require a lot of effort by Irish educational institutions to develop links with continental European universities. And I think there are going to be opportunities for Northern Ireland to have a foot in both camps. It can exploit the fact that it's part of the European Union market while retaining its UK identity as well. And that's an ideal situation in many respects for Northern Ireland, and we should be delighted if Northern Ireland could exploit that to the full.
Absolutely. Because Tony, as John Bruton said there, it's important to talk. There's a lot to talk about. And I think, if you look at the trade and cooperation agreements, a lot has been agreed on, but there's a lot of issues as well that have just been kind of left out of it. When it comes to security, for example, when it comes to foreign affairs. Can you talk us a little bit more about the deal itself and those issues that were kind of pushed to the kind of future, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, the trade experts who look at the agreement, you know, in a dispassionate kind of way, say it's not a bad free trade agreement as free trade agreements go. Zero tariffs, zero quotas, you know, a lot of cooperation in the aviation sphere, in the road haulage sphere. But, you know, when you compare it to what was there before, it's a really thin kind of agreement. Weak on services, very little on foreign and security policy. The police and judicial cooperation element of it is weak. So yeah, I mean, you come away thinking it's not that much better than a no deal situation in some regards. You know, yes, there are no tariffs and there are no quotas, but the non-tariff barriers are formidable, and we've seen the impact of that already. Companies in the UK just not able to cope with the paperwork, the delays, and you know, the Stone Manor supermarket, which you mentioned. You know, we both did reports on it, just outside Brussels, a famous British gourmet supermarket. All of their suppliers just couldn't get stuff over there. Stuff was either held up at customs, they weren't sending it at all, the paperwork was too prohibitive, or it was being sent back. And you know, that's repeated across a whole spectrum of commerce. Now, the thing is, though, that I think we've all been conditioned to look at Brexit through a Conservative Party lens, because the Conservative Party has been managing this whole enterprise since 2011. And the Eurosceptic wing of the Conservative Party, you know, even 10, 20 years before that. But the Conservatives will not be in power forever, and a future Labour government could well decide to take a much more enthusiastic, proactive approach to Europe. As John says, no one's really envisaging rejoining anytime soon, but there's nothing to stop a future government from negotiating add-on agreements, bilateral agreements with the European Union that would make life a bit easier. And certainly, you know, there is an incentive there with the whole level playing fields, non-regression part of it. You know, for the UK to make sure they're not diverging too much from European standards, because if they do, those level playing field provisions will kick in, and you could be seeing tariffs on goods coming from the UK, and vice versa, of course. So, I mean, it is possible to have an optimistic long view, but, you know, we're just not there yet. But, you know, I have a sort of a gut feeling that positivity can be incremental. And, you know, once you get a toehold in the relationship, things start to improve here and there. I understand that there's a working group between the European Union's Foreign Service arm, the EEAS, and the Foreign Office to try and get an agreement on the embassy issue. So bit by bit, you could see a thaw in relations. You could see, you know, just more of an appetite for the UK to keep things close. I mean, at the moment, you know, because the economic dividends of Brexit are just so paltry, the UK government has to trumpet the benefits of sovereignty and being independent. And of course, the vaccination program has given them the perfect gift in that regard. But that's not going to be forever. You know, in a couple of years' time, we'll have moved on from that whole vaccination issue, one hopes, and there could be fertile ground for just a more harmonious relationship. I mean, just to pick up on some of the things John was saying there, and also Steve, on the effect on Ireland of Britain having departed. I mean, Ireland is now uniquely a bridge between the EU and America because of the links with the Biden administration, and it is uniquely an interpreter of the UK. I mean, no one is closer to the UK than Ireland. And it's very useful for the EU to have a country that understands Ireland, that understands the UK, that understands British media, politics, political culture. And I think the EU, and certainly from a briefing that we got after the last summit from a very senior European official who said that they look to Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, for guidance, not just on British views and the British media, but also on the Biden administration as well. So, I mean, there are diplomatic opportunities there for Ireland in the future.
Thank you so much, Tony. And as you were speaking there, I see there's a couple of questions coming in, so thank you for that. And I see one.
Maeve, could I just pick up on a couple of points that Tony said?
Absolutely.
There? Just
Go ahead, Steve.
You know,
yeah.
to
And that'll give me a chance to have a little look through the
yeah.
questions. Yeah, you go ahead.
You know, I think all of the things that Tony has said there, you know, the no tariffs between the two jurisdictions are so true, and I think that's where Northern Ireland has a really unique opportunity in this. It is the only place between these two islands where there are no tariff barriers. That you know, there's no paperwork needed to sell into the UK, which is the world's 5th biggest economy. There's no paperwork needed to sell into the EU. And I actually think at the minute we are in a unique position that if there is a new investor looking to come and set up to sell both to the EU and to the UK, where else other than Northern Ireland can you have that unique dual access? And you know, there's a massive job of work ahead for Invest Northern Ireland to get out and to try and talk about some of the opportunities. I think Tony touches on a really good point about the positivity being incrementally growing, and that if we can start to show some of those economic positives, of course there are problems with the protocol, but if we can start to demonstrate some of the economic benefits of some of the advantages that come with that protocol, I think that could start to grow and start to mushroom a little bit more and start to generate a bit of a feel-good factor here in Northern Ireland as well.
And there's a
Can I ask Steve a question there, Maeve? Do you mind?
You are a journalist, Tony. You know, that is your job.
Sorry to steal your chair for a minute. Steve, can I ask you if Invest Northern Ireland is in any way constrained or reticent about selling the benefits of the protocol, given the political opposition to it?
So look, we are ultimately we're here to try and grow the economy in Northern Ireland, Tony. We need to be very cognizant of our political masters on both sides, and we're aware, very acutely aware, because we live here, of one side sees something as positive, the other sees that as a big negative, and I guess we have been trying to. There's a lot of ignorance over what is the Northern Ireland Protocol away from Northern Ireland. So I've been on a number of webinars across Europe that actually European suppliers didn't realize that that they could still sell into Northern Ireland supply chains, manufacturing supply chains. They didn't realize that, and so we have a responsibility to educate even just existing EU suppliers and existing UK suppliers that those markets are still open for them. Of course we have to be cognizant of what the political views are. And we tend to be a little bit louder and a little bit stronger in selling those benefits the further away we get from Northern Ireland.
Was there something you wanted to say?
No, I'm just admiring Steve's ability to have a different message depending on where he is. And it shows what a good man he is, really.
It's a largely American audience, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, John Bruton, it's by the sounds of it, what you were saying there, how you feel that you could never see the UK come back or align itself a little bit closer. I feel that here in the Parliament today, we saw MEPs really lamenting the fact that Brexit took place, saying it was a historic mistake, but they want to stay close to the UK. They want to stay close to Northern Ireland. They want to make sure that they keep those relations, they keep the talks going, because of course, as Tony pointed out very eloquently a little bit earlier, governments come and go, time passes, when we're 10 years time sitting here, the landscape could be different.
Yeah, I know. I was delighted to hear Tony being a little bit more optimistic than I am about Britain becoming closer to Europe again. When you there's some opinion poll taken in Britain in the last week or two suggesting that 1/5 of those who voted for Remain now are glad that Britain has left. I think this is partly because of the vaccine success, which is attributed wrongly, I think, to Britain not being in the European Union. They could have had exactly the same vaccine policy if they were in the European Union. But anyway,
that's for another panel debate,
Brexit was, to my mind, a project for the reassertion of an English national identity. It had little or nothing to do with economics, little or nothing to do with what was good for Britain. It was about England reasserting itself in a way in which Irish people should understand. Remember, we paid a very high price 100 years ago for our independence. We had 30 years of stagnation and a very high costs, but we insisted we wanted to be independent, notwithstanding the cost. And in a way, England is going through that sort of a process at the moment. They're asserting their separateness. Maybe in 30 or 40 years' time, they'll come around and say, well, we've done it now. We can go back in with our heads held high into the European Union. I hope it will happen. I'm not overly optimistic.
Sorry. Go on.
No, that's it. Really.
That's it. And in the meantime, you're calling on all Irish viewers today to start learning French, start learning German, and also improve their Irish, because there's plenty of opportunity here in Brussels.
There are huge opportunities, because Ireland, English is not now one of the official languages of the European Union, because we have nominated Irish as being our official language, and there's no English speaking. There's no country which has English as its first language in the European Union now. I think that should be remedied, but if it causes problems, it certainly should be remedied, because English is in fact the language that's most widely spoken at meetings, EU-wide meetings, which is obviously gives anyone who's a native speaker, as Irish people are, of English, an opportunity to do a little bit of finessing on the drafting of agreements and so forth, because we have that certain advantage in the language that perhaps others from Poland or France wouldn't have, because it isn't their first language.
Okay, well, look, let's kick off with some questions. First, thank you so much for all your questions. Let's have a look here. So one question for John Bruton. Possibly Sinn Féin could be in the next Irish government. Would you see that cause any change to the Irish government's attitude towards Brexit? And if so, what kind, if any?
I don't think so. So as far as I can see, Sinn Féin have supported the position that the Irish government has taken on the Brexit negotiations. Sinn Féin at one stage was in favour of Ireland leaving the European Union, but I think they have left that policy behind and they're now in favour of remaining in the European Union. Obviously, there would be changes in domestic policy if Sinn Féin were to be part of a future government, but it hasn't happened yet. It may never happen.
Okay. I'll move on to another question or comment rather from Laurie Mooney. Superb panel and information. Great to see my former boss, Editor Cliff Carlson, looking hearty. Okay. Grow all you can on small scale for cross-border trade on the island. So very positive messages coming there from Laurie. Thank you so much. And now we have a question from John Maguire. Good question, in fact. He's asking, does the fact that the Northern Ireland Protocol is voted upon by Stormont every 4 years or 8 not give rise to great uncertainty that could impact upon Northern Ireland's attractiveness as a place to do business and to invest in? So we can give that question perhaps to Steve Harper there, and then maybe Simon as well. You can come in there because you've been a little bit quiet for a while.
Yeah, and okay. So yeah, business loves certainty. We know that. That's business. Whether you supported Brexit or were against Brexit, and you were in business in the last 4 years, all business we were asking for was a little bit of certainty. Tell us what we need to do, and tell us what we go for, how to go forward. So I do think that the Stormont having a vote on it 4 years doesn't pose a problem, but it certainly is another thing to think about. I think it's on us, it's on Invest Northern Ireland, it's on everyone in Northern Ireland to show, as I talked about earlier, about the economic benefits that we can get from this. And can we get some economic benefits? I think that question then will answer itself.
Okay.
I certainly agree on the issue of certainty. I'm looking at one of the other questions, if you wouldn't mind, which is the U.S. Congress, President Biden's views on what happens if the UK doesn't get a trade deal with the US. I actually think we just need to be very careful that there's a very deep relationship between Britain and the United States, which goes a lot deeper than just there is a huge defense and security relationship between Britain and the United States, which brings them an involvement with each other, which is, has a massive depth to it. So, and they will want to continue that cooperation going forward. So I think the relationship between Britain and America is a bit more than just about what's happening with regard to trade. I mean, certainly President Biden has been very clear about the ramifications of a potential trade deal with the United Kingdom with Britain should there be any tinkering, as it says there, with the Good Friday Agreement. And going back to some of the comments earlier on, which were about Ireland's position in that relationship, it used to be Ireland was a bridge between the United States and the European Union. I absolutely agree that Ireland is finding itself in a position where it's a bridge, I think, between the United States, the European Union, and Britain, and that may alter the nature of some of the foreign direct investment coming into Ireland over time because of the type of investment that goes into the UK, which is slightly different to the type of investment that goes into Ireland, and what that means for instance, digital security in Ireland. It's going to be a big issue, I think, for that next wave of investment that's coming. And when we talk about certainty for the Republic of Ireland, one of the big things that we keep getting asked by American companies that are invested in Ireland is, will we continue to be able to get items on and off the island of Ireland? And we've seen the opening up of all of those new transportation routes on and off the island. So, in terms of giving certainty around that, that move away from the land bridge was led largely by the large American companies based in Ireland to secure space on all of those ships, and they will not be coming back in any great hurry to the land bridge in any way, shape, or form. So I think we need to have a slight bit of caution when we think about Britain and its relationship with the United States, because I think it's a very deep and historical relationship, and deep at very many different levels in terms of global security as well. I don't know whether I'm as optimistic as Tony would be about Britain rejoining the European Union. I'm not quite sure some of us will see that in our lifetime. If I'm being very honest, I think there's a lot to play out in the Brexit story in the UK. I think that their emergence from COVID-19 with the vaccination is going to mask any downturn in the economy over there, because there will be there is a massive lift in the economy ongoing in the United States at the moment as American consumers come out of COVID-19. I mentioned about this shortage of containers around the world. Part of that is now being driven by the fact that there's a huge amount of them stuck in quays in the United States, because they brought a whole amount of consumer goods into the United States. If you see the results from 3 of the banks in America that were released last week, you'll see that there is a huge uptick going on in there. And I think you will see a big uptick led by consumer demand in the UK, which is going to negate any negative impact from a consumer point of view. And I think from a political point of view, I think a lot of people in the UK now feel that, like Boris, because of his stance towards the bringing in the vaccine so much earlier, and they invested they put a lot of money, as did the United States, into the development of some of those vaccines, whereas I think the European Union, we were extremely slow. And I think we've handled our approach to the vaccine development extremely poorly. As a result of which we will lag behind some of the other leading economies in the world. And we are going to feel that economically as we progress through the year. So I think the Brexit thing has got a lot further to run. I think that, I think the political leaders that are there at the moment will be reinforced by the public, certainly over the next year to 18 months as a COVID lift comes. I think people are not really going to feel it in their pockets for quite some time over there. So I'm less optimistic that the UK will be in any rush to either rejoin the European Union. I think that's miles away. You've got the whole Scottish issue in the meantime, which has got to play out. And so I think I think it's very far away. I think it will take a whole shift in the politics and sentiment in the in Great Britain to really, really, have any about turn in that. And I think the other thing that's going to happen over the next couple of years is, I think you're looking at a 2 to 3 year period of adjustment in the UK to get used to these new rules that are in place. And I think the UK, I think was it John saying that they had to justify it from a sovereignty point of view. Economically, they're going to be years trying to regain where they are, and I think whereas history may be a little bit more kind to Ireland and our decision to forgo 30 years of rapid growth in that, I think in the modern world where it's so connected, I don't think you can can't put 30 years by. I think it's only a few years before you won't be forgiven for that. So I think that it will take a whole political upheaval, I think, in the UK for that super tanker of Brexit to change. And it is only now, I was reading an article written by, I think, the outgoing, CEO of the British Chambers of Commerce, which is an enormous organization in the UK. And you might recall, I think his predecessor got into trouble because of his stance towards Brexit back, I think, before the vote. And so that, business in the UK is really only beginning to find its voice now. So I don't think there's any kind of massive opposition to it yet at the moment.
Okay. That question by Sean Moynihan was actually very interesting. I don't know if any of our other panelists want to answer it. Perhaps John Bruton. It'd be good to hear your thoughts as well on that. The one on how concerned would London be regarding the US Congress and President Biden's
yes,
position.
I think I'd agree with Simon. I think we in Ireland anyway, and Irish Americans should be very careful about trying to come between Britain and the United States. They were allies in 2 wars. They're in the First World War and the Second World War. They are still very intimately involved in NATO. I noticed that Britain is going to send some of their navy to the Pacific, which is the big concern of the United States, the relationship with China. So I think we should be, and also they cooperate very closely on intelligence, Cheltenham and all of that. So I think we shouldn't overplay our hand in this issue. On the other hand, I think it is important to say that the security relationship between the United States and Britain is primarily to do with the defense of Europe. It was about the defense of Europe in 1917 when the United States joined, and it was about the defense of Europe in 1941 when the United States entered the war on the same side as Britain. But now Britain has disengaged from Europe. So in a way, what's the rationale for British military policy? That's a question I think that we haven't got a very clear answer to. There's been the white paper has been produced by the UK government, but it seems to be a little bit of everything rather than a very clear strategic choice. obviously, as well, Ireland is not immune. If one were to see transatlantic cables being disrupted by somebody who was engaged in indirect warfare against the European Union, Ireland alone doesn't have the capacity to defend those cables or to combat cyber attacks that may be made on infrastructure that we have. So I think security cooperation, the necessity of security cooperation may bring Britain, Ireland and Europe closer together out of necessity rather than choice.
Maeve, just on that point, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you look at the next wave of investment out of the United States and the way the world is going, which is a huge amount of digital in that, and you talk about the information lines that transverse the Atlantic, I actually think that is a huge issue going forward. That if we're going to have a massively digital economy, and the United States continues to invest around the world and particularly in Ireland, and there is this issue around those transatlantic cables, I think Britain, and Britain was a member of the European Union certainly in its latter years. It was 50% of the EU's military capacity. 50% of the EU's military capacity, and it is a huge issue, and I think we underestimate it at our peril.
Okay, couple more questions coming in. We've just about 10 more minutes left before we wrap, so I'll just keep going. To complete change of topic, question here from Tony O'Connell. He's asking whether or not Brexit will affect non-trade interactions. So he wants to move away from trade and talk about different issues like scientific research and collaborating, the arts and artists, educational exchanges, etc. So how is Brexit impacting them? I mean, Tony, you can probably put light on this issue, the Erasmus Plus programs and stuff like that. So how is Brexit impacting the arts, culture, educational exchanges?
Well, on the arts question, a very kind of salient example was spotted within days of Brexit taking effect, and that was the inability of bands to tour the EU, British bands there are thousands of British bands and musicians who play concerts in European cities. I mean, a European tour is second nature to any British band, as well as trying to break into America, of course. But it was discovered pretty soon after Brexit took effect that because the UK had rejected an EU offer for a fairly straightforward kind of exemption for artists and sports people and so on, from having to have work visas, then it meant that if you were traveling to the EU to earn money to play concerts, which would mean you're earning money, then you would need to have a visa to do that. And if you're doing a European tour, that would mean you would need a visa in each European country, and there's no single European work visa. So that was just looking like a nightmare for British musicians, rock bands and so on. And then because of the cabotage rules as well, you couldn't get a tour bus in the UK that would take you on the tour, your tour of 8 or 10 European cities. So there was a big letter signed by people like Elton John and Simon Rattle and all the luminaries of the arts world. The UK government initially blamed the EU, but then they had to admit that they had, because of the whole freedom of movement sensitivity and obsession in the UK, they had to admit that it was actually the UK decision not to accept this, easier method of touring. So there's that. And then for students, the Erasmus program is the big obvious one. The UK has decided to opt out of Erasmus. They were given the option of opting in, but they refuse. So they've set up their own Turing scheme. There's been a lot said about that, saying it's not nearly as good, but the UK would argue it's different. It's worldwide. So I think artistic relations and educational relations will definitely suffer. On science funding, I mean, I think the UK will, if I'm not mistaken, it will opt into the Horizon Science funding program and will pay for the privilege of doing that. So that will probably continue to an extent, but obviously not the way it was. So yeah, all of these areas have been affected by Brexit.
Tony, just a little question I wanted to ask you. What about the press, the role the press, of course, has played in Brexit and going forward? I mean, have you seen a Brexitist when it comes to the British press corps who've been based here in Brussels as your colleagues for the last 20 odd years, or, you know, what role will they play going forward?
I mean, I haven't seen a big exodus since Brexit took effect, but I think that's probably because everything's being done virtual. So you're not meeting people in the press room, in the press bar like you used to in the European Commission. You have a midday briefing every day, which was a great way to catch up with your colleagues and get a sense of what's happening, what the issues are. Certainly some of the key British tabloids didn't actually have correspondents in Brussels until the Brexit negotiations got underway. And those kinds of correspondents were having to learn about the single market from scratch. And as a result, some of them have become, as individual journalists, even though they're working for, fairly radically anti-EU newspapers, they themselves seem to have grasped, a much more nuanced understanding of the EU, and that's reflected in their reporting or certainly their tweeting. But at the same time, you can see how certain journalists are still kind of hostile to the EU project and have taken great pleasure in the EU's missteps over the vaccination program. I'm involved in a WhatsApp group. There are, I think, 3 WhatsApp groups for European accredited journalists connected to the European Council for information for journalists. And in one of those, I'm in one of those WhatsApp groups, and I noticed that the whole Sofagate issue, where President von der Leyen was given the cold shoulder during the meeting with President Erdogan in Turkey. It was the British journalists who were in the WhatsApp group who were really demanding answers and wanting to know what was going on with Ursula von der Leyen. But I think they were doing that just to sort of stir things up. Like, what's it to you guys? You're not in the EU anymore. Why should you care? But I think we will probably see a drift away from a whittling down of the British press corps in the EU. Certainly the BBC are probably not going to be as heavily staffed as they were before. And that will be a big pity, a big shame. But it's hard to quantify just yet when we're all doing stuff remotely.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so we'll move on. We have a question now from Tom. What will happen, GDPR, so sensitive data housed in the UK, also, this should be helpful for Ireland, as the US Privacy Shield ruling means that the European GDPR data cannot be housed in the US. So who's our GDPR data expert on the panel? John Bruton, maybe?
I think Tony's the expert.
Tony's the expert for everything.
This is
so arcane, I really couldn't attempt to answer it.
Yeah. You're giving me all the hard questions at the last minute. You're giving me all the hard questions at the last minute. So
yeah, we went from bans to Erasmus, and now we've gone into like the technicalities of the GDPR data. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, that merits a whole discussion.
Yeah, I'll try and answer this. I mean, certainly, yeah, it looks like they will get a data adequacy agreement sometime soon, which will basically say that the EU regards the UK's data protection regime as adequate, so that they can trust the data of EU companies and citizens being shared with the UK. But having said that, we've seen with the Privacy Shield and the Max Schrems cases that have gone to the European Court of Justice in regard to the United States, how European Court of Justice judges are taking an increasingly hard line on data privacy and the rights of EU citizens. And it's worth noting that while we've had the Privacy Shield and various other initiatives in the US to try and reassure European citizens that their data is safe in the US, it's pretty widely accepted that the United Kingdom security services take a lot more liberties with personal data and personal freedoms when it comes to investigating terrorism or any other issues. So in other words, UK agencies have a reputation of being a lot more intrusive into the lives of citizens than US agencies are. Now, when the UK was a member of the EU, that didn't matter because they were all signed up to the GDPR. But now that they're out, I think we could expect a lot more challenges to data protection issues relating to the UK now that they're out by people like Max Schrems in the future. Max Schrems, by the way, is an Austrian privacy activist who has taken big high-profile cases against Facebook because of Facebook handing over data to US intelligence agencies. And a lot of that data was European data.
Thank you so much, Tony. Gareth, it's just 8:30, but I think you give me the green light to just take one or two more questions, more political questions. So John Bruton, this one's for you. Kieran Diamond, the question comes from. He said, John Bruton, you mentioned the 3 strands in the Belfast Agreement. Strand 1 is the Northern Ireland Assembly. Strand 2, the North-South arrangement. Strand 3, the East-West arrangement. Kieran's asking, should there be a 4th strand to broaden it to include Europe?
I don't think so, really. I mean, well, first of all, the Good Friday Agreement is not at the moment up for renegotiation. And the European Union obviously supports Ireland in its involvement with Northern Ireland and with Britain. But I don't see any advantage in trying to create an artificial 4th strand. I think we should just use whatever benefits the EU can give to us in finding a solution to the problems that exist in Northern Ireland. And I think as there is an issue of how Northern Ireland public representatives are to be consulted about regulations that may be made in future by the EU that will apply in Northern Ireland, in which they will not have a direct vote. And I think that's something that's going to require quite a lot of thought, how the UK government would represent them, and how, for example, people on the ground in Northern Ireland would be consulted about things that might affect them. I think we're going to need to give a lot of thought to that, because just as in the United States, there was a war about no taxation without representation, I think there is going to be in Northern Ireland a concern about no legislation without representation.
I'll just make one observation there, Maeve, if I may.
Sure, go for it, Tony, yeah.
I mean, it's worth remembering that Switzerland and Norway swallow the entire European Union acquis rulebook, and they have no representation at all. They can be observers. There are various forums for them to meet and talk to the EU, but Swiss or Norwegian citizens don't have any input in laws regarding the single market that they have to follow. But they believe it's worth them being in the single market because it gives them frictionless trade with the EU. The other thing worth saying is that there is the Joint Committee, which has British and EU ministers managing that relationship, but also you can have, there's nothing to stop the UK having the first and deputy first ministers involved in those meetings. And indeed, Irish officials are involved in those meetings as well. And there's a joint consultative working group, which can involve Northern Ireland officials and ministers, looking at new legislation which might come up in the EU, which will affect Northern Ireland. And finally, the protocol, keeps Northern Ireland in the single market, but if there are any new rules being brought in by the EU that are to do with the single market, which will affect Northern Ireland, and if any of those new rules are offensive to the British government can raise a flag and say, we're not happy with this, and they have to get into a period of consultation with the European Commission. But I mean, if it's hard to see how a new piece of legislation regarding light bulbs or something will be offensive to the UK if they're being applied in Northern Ireland. So again, it gets back to this point that a lot of this stuff is about technical issues, not big issues of sovereignty.
Absolutely. And just one final question there coming in from Brendan. Yeah, this inevitably was going to come up. So when and how does the United Ireland question play into the Brexit discussion? I'll maybe give that one to John Bruton.
Well, it doesn't. The issue of whether there might be a poll on Irish unity is provided for in the Good Friday Agreement if the British Secretary of State believes that there's a majority in Northern Ireland to move towards Irish unity, he or she can call such a poll. I'm not so sure that this is a useful discussion to be having. I think the priority as far as Northern Ireland is concerned and as the whole island of Ireland is peace and stability, establishing and maintaining peace and stability. And I have doubts about whether a debate, in fact, I'm very convinced that to have an intense debate about a united Ireland, I do not think that would contribute to peace and stability in the medium term. In fact, the reverse.
Okay, John Bruton, thank you so much. And I guess that pretty much wraps it up for now. We're just a couple of minutes over time. So thank you so much to all our panelists, to John Bruton, to Steve Harper, to Simon McKeever, and to Tony Connelly. Thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for your answers, and for tackling all those questions as well, which I understand we're kind of flip-flopping, but I really wanted to bring everyone's in, because thank you so much. That's what makes these discussions so interesting, because we can hear the issues that you really want to hear. So with that, I would like to thank you all and wish you all in the United States a nice afternoon and a good day, and here in Europe, a nice evening. I hope you can relax now after what's probably been a long day. And I'd like to hand over now to Gareth just to say goodbye to everyone.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much, Maeve. I really hope everybody found that to be very engaging. I know I certainly did find that myself. The last couple of years politically have been very interesting with all the machinations moving, and then certainly the last 12 months throwing a world pandemic into the situation as well. So a lot of moving parts, and it's been a great insight in the last 90 minutes. So thank you, May, for a great job as moderator. John, Steve, Tony, and Simon as well. Thank you for taking time out of your calendar to give your valuable insights. None of these events at a network go without the work of my colleagues on the committee. We're all volunteers. So again, thank you to James Coleman, Judy McKeever back in Dublin, Rory Convery, who sent a lot of emails and put the panel together. So thank you to my colleagues on the committee. Also to Paul Dowling, who helped with the creative content, and also Matt Gallagher on the back-end IT registration, Zoom and whatnot. And to the extended committee for always assisting with putting together these great events. Obviously, the last 12 months, we have just have to morph on to virtual events, and we are continuing that next week. Everybody that registered to this event will get a friendly email for our next, or in conjunction with IN USA, a speed networking event. We ran one in February ourselves, was a very creative way to push this position here locally. And that event will take place next Thursday, April 22nd at 6 p.m. local time here in Chicago. So keep an eye out for an email to register for that, should you be so inclined. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much to everyone who participated. We wish you, on behalf of the Irish Network, continued health, and hopefully the worst of this pandemic is behind us, and as we work through 2021, getting more open and getting back to business as usual. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Jim.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.